But 3 days to Election Day in the United States, critical swing states in the Midwest will be populated by both campaigns. With just 72 hours to go in terms of campaign events, President Donald Trump will spend the weekend crisscrossing the must-win state of Pennsylvania with Democratic nominee Joe Biden close by in the state of Michigan.
We are rounding the turn on the pandemic, with or without vaccine. We have the vaccine, it's going to come, but even without it, we're rounding the turn. Our vaccine will eradicate the virus and the pandemic, and it will end. Quickly restore normal life. That's what we want, is normal life. Take us back 7 months.
The President of the United States is accusing the medical profession of making up COVID deaths so they make more money. Doctors and nurses go to work every day to save lives. They do their jobs. Donald Trump should stop attacking them and do his job. We choose unity over division, science over fiction, and yes, we choose truth over lies.
2020 happened, and the coronavirus struck from China. But I can tell you, before the first documented case of community spread anywhere in America, President Trump's leadership shone forth. Our president did what no American president had ever done. He suspended all travel from China, the second largest economy in the world. President Trump put the health of America first.
We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. Because we are fighting for the country we love, and we know we are better than this.
So for more on the closing stages of this race, we joined now by a correspondent in York Sherwin Bryce-Pease. So as we've been showing the closing stages of this race, and it really has everybody whipped up on both sides of the camps, especially in the key states. Remind us why it's so important for both candidates and what their closing arguments are in this race.
Well, because Joe Biden enjoys this 10-point lead nationally, and we are not having a discussion about how easy it's going to be for him to close the deal based on those numbers. Why? Because swing states are what drives the victor to the White House. So they will be populating the Pennsylvanias of this world, the North Carolinas of this world. Kamala Harris was in Texas last night, of course, trying to turn that blue for the first time since 1976. She's in Florida today. Joe Biden is in Michigan today. He was in Minnesota yesterday. The president was in Minnesota. So that Midwestern sequence of states, the series of states, very, very critical here in determining who gets to 270 Tsepiso, which is the magic number in terms of winning the Electoral College. Closing arguments, very divergent views. You know, this is the pandemic election, if you will. COVID-19 is the main issue, and its impact on the economy, on healthcare subsequent to that. But COVID-19 is the conversation, and the closing argument from President Trump is we are turning the corner. We have a vaccine coming. That is going to be our silver bullet. Trust me, give me another 4 years. Joe Biden, on the other hand, pointing to the over 230,000 American deaths. The president also, he was very critical also of the president, who is now blaming doctors for inflating the COVID-19 death toll in the country. He's arguing that they make more money this way. Of course, this is completely antithetical to what doctors have been doing over the last 7 months in the USA. And Joe Biden hitting him hard here in terms of the sacrifices to peace that frontline workers have made over these months. Over 1,000 doctors have lost their lives as a result of COVID-19. So for the president now to be saying that doctors are part of a conspiracy to inflate the numbers in terms of the death toll in this country, really being used now as an electoral issue in these closing days.
So, Sherwin, we're also seeing reports of growing fears in the country around possible election violence. Businesses already boarding up for storefronts in case things take a turn for the worse. Are we likely to see scenes that we saw, especially just in terms of fervour, like we saw in the Black Lives Matter protests?
Yeah, I had an interview a short time ago with a CEO of a company called Harken. Harken is a company, it's a tech-enabled company that is working with newsrooms to prepare for what they are calling a worst-case scenario. Look, Tsepi, so we are living in a very divided society in the United States. It's a very militarized society. Weapon sales have gone through the roof as we've gotten close to the election. The FBI has recognized that white supremacy is the biggest homegrown terror threat in the United States right now. High-rise buildings where billionaires live in New York City, for example, are locking their doors on election night, boarding up windows. Businesses in LA, Washington, Chicago, and here in New York taking extra precautions. Let's listen to an exchange I had with Jennifer Brandel, the CEO of Harken. She wrote an article earlier this week warning that this election will go off the rails. This is that exchange.
The country is so very divided, right? Cities versus rural, blue states versus red states, Trump versus Biden, conservative judges versus liberal judges, masks versus no masks, my way or the highway. Is the fundamental notion of democracy under threat in the United States?
I believe so. I do believe so. I think that forces have been conspiring. Many have been conspiring in order to divide the country and pin us against each other. It's a really great strategy for destabilizing the country, which it has worked very well, is to, instead of people who are feeling unsatisfied or like they don't get their basic needs met through government and other social services, to start looking at one another as the problem and not some of these bigger systemic issues, which are harder to wrap your head around and frankly take a long time to change. So I think it's an immediate way of finding some release, is finding a villain on the other side, whatever that side is.
Who's driving this division, do you think?
Well, I can't wait to see the documentaries that come out in 5 years, looking back at what happened now when people are free to speak. But, I think there's a lot of that happening, obviously, with the conservative movement in the U.S. I think they know that if everyone in the U.S. did have their right to vote, conservatism and the Republican Party would probably no longer be a thing.
Company Harken Tsepiso has also created an online resource called Election SOS, essentially providing journalists with the best information around scenario planning, if there's post-election violence, what to do, the experts that you can call on in terms of de-escalating violence, voter suppression experts, and particularly useful for newsrooms that themselves today, given the financial constraints that they face, don't have the tools to really support journalists who are in the field. And so really, really important statement coming out here just days before this election. And certainly, as journalists working here, a palpable fear that we sense how divided this country is and the aspersions that have been cast by the president himself on the veracity of the mail-in voting system, calling it fraud before the ballots have even started to be counted. So a lot of unease and uncertainty as we move to election day here.
And Sherwin, we certainly saw the very vulnerable situation that journalists found themselves under during those protests. We saw some attacked and hurt. So, as you say, very sobering words, warning worth watching. But 86 million people have already voted in the early voting across the country. Record high turnout. Is that what we're expecting on the day? Is it a good sign? And is it a good sign for the Democrats as opposed to for democracy?
It is, right? I mean, we are talking about records that were set back in 1908. The expectation that the total number of voters in this election, Tsepiso, will exceed 150 million. The last big record we had was in 2008. I think the last number in 2016 was 138 million. It's going to far outpace that. Over 86 million people already voting. And so, you can expect that number even to double by the end of election day. So a great show of democracy, a great deal of enthusiasm. Clearly, Donald Trump and Joe Biden driving voters to the polls. But the big concern as a result of these big numbers, in particular, the growth we have seen in terms of mail-in ballots and absentee ballots, is that this could delay the result on election night. So don't expect to know who the president of the United States is, at least the president-elect of the United States is, come the end of election night. That might take a few days for the first time in a long time, and that's making a lot of people nervous here.
Right, thanks for that, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC correspondent in New York. back on the continent, Tanzania's